Hi everyone. Today's 3 stories are shocking. We start off in West Virginia, where a woman hears something repeatedly calling her before she sets off to investigate. And then down to Florida, where a Chief Warrant Officer in the Navy goes hunting on his cousin's land. He sets out expecting to see one thing, but just wait to see what he finds instead. And finally, a young girl in Oklahoma witnesses something horrifying with her grandmother that she still thinks about to this day. So buckle up and subscribe if you're having fun. Now let's get into the stories. To start this out, I grew up in West Virginia, and I've heard all the stories about the creatures in the woods. My grandfather was superstitious and always told me that the land we lived on did not belong to us. I kind of brushed all the superstitious stuff aside because I never saw or experienced anything personally. That is, until about a week ago when something bizarre happened. I live with my husband, but he had picked up an extra shift at work and I wasn't expecting him home until 2 a.m., so I was home alone. I often have trouble sleeping when he's not home, so I was up watching some late-night cartoons with my cat. It was about 11 o'clock at night when I heard my husband Jim call my name. I was surprised that he was home so early. Usually he sends a text when he's on his way. But I yelled to him that I was in bed watching TV and then just waited, expecting him to walk through the bedroom door. A few minutes passed, but he didn't come in. I called for him again and waited for a response. For a moment I thought I might have imagined hearing him call my name, but at the same time, part of me was on alert. I muted the TV and I listened carefully for any sounds from downstairs. After a moment, I heard him call my name again. Yes, it was the exact same voice I've heard every day for the past 3 years. I was instantly at ease. And then he called my name again. There was no inflection in the voice, though, nothing to indicate what he was calling me for. It sounded a bit off, too, but I just figured he was tired or something. "What is it?" I finally yelled. I was sitting on the edge of the bed now with the remote in my hand. He called my name again, but this time it sounded further away. I finally stood up from the bed and I walked over to the door. I flipped the hall light on, and just so you know, I watch way too many horror movies where they all walk around in the dark, so I wasn't about to do that. I looked down the stairs expecting to see Jim standing there, but the hall was completely empty. So I slowly started walking down the stairs. I was on edge already, and now I was getting worse. Something about this was totally creeping me out. I called out for Jim again, but didn't get a response. I walked through the house and I flipped on every light looking for him. Eventually, I made it to the kitchen. I turned on the light and instantly noticed that the kitchen door leading outside to the back of the house was cracked open. Every part of my body screamed at me to turn around and go back upstairs, and I wish I would have listened, but I moved forward. I knew I heard Jim, and I wasn't going to go back until I saw him in case something was wrong. I opened the kitchen door the rest of the way and stood there in the doorway. We lived right at the edge of the woods. My grandfather owned the house before us, and he passed it down to me, and he had built a large barn where he used to raise goats. I stared at the barn for a moment, wondering why in the hell the light was on out there. We don't use the barn at all. It's old and rickety, and the wood is waterlogged and rotten. It isn't even safe to use for storage. I yelled for Jim again, but didn't get any response. All I could think about was why he would be in the barn this late at night, let alone home yet from work. I slipped on a pair of boots sitting by the door and started walking towards the barn. The closer I got to it, I could hear these shuffling sounds inside, like somebody was walking across the old, crunchy hay. I heard my name being called again, but this time it didn't come from the barn. The voice came from the woods, beside me. I stopped mid-stride with my eyes locked on the open barn door. I was about halfway between the barn and the house and completely petrified. And then, without any noise leading up to it, the light in the barn shut off. And now in the darkness I could see a pair of glowing yellow eyes. I immediately turned and booked it back to the house, slamming the kitchen door shut and locking it. I grabbed one of the kitchen knives and I hurried up the stairs to grab my phone. I was about to call the police when I saw a message from Jim. He had texted me saying he wouldn't be home until 7 a.m. because he was able to pick up overtime hours. He said don't wait up for him. It felt like my heart stopped beating when I read that. I knew for sure now that whoever, or whatever had called my name wasn't Jim. I immediately dialed 911 and I explained to them that someone had just been in my house, calling my name, and that I had seen someone in my barn and asked them to send a patrol car right away. One of the downsides of living in a small town in the country is how far you are from everything, how isolating it can be. It took 30 minutes for the police to arrive. It felt like hours. I was crouching on the floor in the corner beside my bed with the knife in my hand. The entire time I was waiting for the police, I kept hearing Jim's voice call my name. It felt like it grew more desperate every time it called, and it was horrifying. As soon as I saw the lights from the cop car, I ran outside to safety. He walked the perimeter of my property, but said he didn't see any signs of anyone. And even more terrifying, the barn didn't look like anybody had stepped foot in it in ages. He told me to get some sleep, and I could tell that he thought it was all my imagination. Well, I didn't sleep at all, to be honest. I drove over to where Jim works and just sat in the car in the parking lot until he was off. I don't know who or what I'd seen and heard in our house that night, but I know it had to be something supernatural. Oh yeah, and by the way, we've since gotten a German Shepherd who now never leaves my side. I should start by saying that I'm not typically prone to believing in stories of strange creatures. I mean, I've always been a serious person with a serious job. I'm a Chief Warrant Officer, and I've been in the Navy for 25 years. I've spent plenty of time in the wild. I started hunting with my dad when I was 12. I've never been one to scare easily. I've been in combat, and I had to deal with all kinds of dicey situations. Anyway, my buddy Bill and I liked to go hunting wild pigs on my cousin's farm down in Florida. It's just a little south of Jacksonville. I would never go alone. It's a two-person job. One person would man the spotlight and the other would have a rifle. We would roam through the cornfields until we heard animals rustling around, and then we would hit them with the spotlight and take our shots. The time I'm talking about, we went out on a night in January. It was pretty cold, probably down in the 40s. We drove out there and then we walked out to a field where we had known the pigs to hang out. We settled in to listen. There was no moon, and it was cloudy, so it was just about as dark as you could get. It was just the right conditions to get the pigs. It wasn't too long before we started hearing some rustling and grunting. Bill hit the spotlight, and we saw 5 or 6 pretty big pigs. I had my rifle ready, and I fired at the biggest pig, and I downed him with a shot behind the ear. The rest of the pigs panicked, and I got off about 3 more shots, but they went kind of high, and the pigs made it to the tree line. My ears were ringing and my adrenaline was pumping. I was really wishing I had gotten more than one. We started walking toward the one on the ground, but as soon as I took a step toward it, we heard a scream. It was a loud, angry scream, and it sounded like it was close. I was like, "What the hell is that?" And Bill looked at me, all freaked out. He shone the light around and scanned the open field and the trees at the edge. We couldn't see anything. He started to say something, but then we heard the scream again, and it seemed even closer and louder. It was really loud, but really raspy too, like if you went to a football game and screamed and hollered and wound up losing half your voice. And the next day you tried to scream as loud as you could for 10 seconds. That's what it sounded like. Bill said, "Give me your pistol. We need to get out of here." I had a pistol on me along with the rifle. I handed him my .45. But I said, "What about the pig?" He said, "Screw the pig." We were about a mile away from the truck on a 1,000-acre farm, with some kind of demon thing screaming at us in the pitch black. We started to feel panicky. We found the track we had followed in and started to walk away fast, but we kept turning back to scan the area, thinking we were about to see something come after us. And then we heard it again, and turned around, and we saw this thing on the path about 50 feet away. This creature was only about 4 feet tall, but it was staring at us with these crazy red eyes. It had spikes down its back with leathery gray skin. It looked hairless to me, and it gave us this weird grin, and I swear it looked like it only had like 3 long teeth in the front of its mouth. Its hind legs looked huge. It was like we were paralyzed trying to figure out what in the hell we were looking at. And then Bill remembered that he had the pistol, and he raised it, and the thing took off into the corn. We finally came to our senses and started running full speed toward the truck. I don't remember if there were any more screams. My adrenaline was way up, and all my focus was on running as fast as I could without tripping or falling. We made it back to the truck, and I hightailed it back to my cousin's house. On the ride home, we were trying to calm ourselves down. But Bill just kept saying, "What the hell was that? No freaking way that was a hog." And all I could say was, "It sure wasn't." We got back to my cousin's house where they had made a bonfire and we were standing around. We must have looked pretty wild-eyed because my cousin came over and handed us 2 beers right away and was like, "Rough night? Did you get a pig?" "Yeah, we left the pig out there. Maybe we'll get it in the morning." He looked pretty confused, and then we both just started telling him about the crazy screaming, and he said, "Yeah, raccoons can make some really wild noises." Then we told him what we saw, and he seemed to get a little pale. And he started telling us about this weird thing that had happened with his neighbor's sheep the week before. He said almost 10 sheep had been found slaughtered, and they were completely drained of blood with this strange puncture marks on their chests. We could tell he felt weird about saying this, but then he said that the neighbor thought a chupacabra had gotten them. I'd heard that word before, but I thought it was just some weird legend from South America or something. And that was that. We got the pig the next day. We felt okay going out there in the daylight, but honestly, I don't know that I'd want to be out there in the dark ever again. It was summer in Oklahoma, and I was about 10, maybe 11. That day, my grandma picked up me and my younger sister from daycare, and we had gone to eat pizza and then go grocery shopping. By this point, it was right after dark, and we were taking the same way home that we did every time. But that night, everything was going to be different. The roads were empty, but that wasn't strange in our county where there weren't a ton of people. I always loved the way the trees lit up when the headlights hit them, and I was watching them out the window as we drove by, trying not to be dizzy as they raced past. We were in Grandma's truck, and so my little sister was in the middle seat, and she was playing around with the radio. Par for the course for a little kid. She got bored easily. But what wasn't normal was when Grandma looked up and started pointing. Of course, this caught my attention. I looked up too, but I couldn't understand why she was freaking out at first. But it didn't take me long to figure it out. Up ahead, above the tree line, we could see 3 lights. They were just floating there in the sky. And that's when I noticed that my hair started to float up a bit, like it was staticky, and everything around just felt wrong. The trees weren't moving. I heard my grandma gasp, and then she pulled off the road and into this open field next to us. We sat in the truck, and we both watched as this thing stayed in one place, just hanging there in the sky. Also, it was creepy quiet. You couldn't hear any noises coming from the thing, like you would if it was a plane or a helicopter, or any animal noises around either. It was as if we were in this silent bubble, watching the thing hover there in one place. There was no movement, no wind, just absolute stillness. I couldn't believe my eyes, and Grandma obviously couldn't either. She had opened her door and stood with one foot on the ground and one still in the truck with her hand gripping the steering wheel. She looked like she was ready to jump back in and slam her door at any second. I remember looking over at her and seeing that her grip was so tight that her knuckles were white. My unshakable grandma was obviously shaken. Meanwhile, my little sister was excited about the pretty lights we were looking at. She was too young to know that this wasn't normal. Even though it was still warm from the heat of the day, I shivered, and I was covered in goosebumps all over my body. My hair still stood on end, and it all just felt wrong. Everything was telling me that we needed to run, to get out of there. I didn't understand how I knew that we needed to get out of there, but I knew it. I was scared, and I yelled for Grandma to get in the truck, begging her to get us home. When she finally heard me, she jumped back in and slammed the truck into gear. The tires spun in the grass before we got traction, but once they grabbed, we were racing home. But even as we put distance between us and that thing, that electric feeling didn't go away right away. I spun around, and it was still in the same spot, not following us, but it was now spinning. The lights were going around and around, and I could see another light underneath it, like a beam shining down. But aside from spinning, it wasn't moving, wasn't following us, it wasn't retreating, it just stayed in that one place, spinning faster and faster like a top. I screamed at Grandma to hurry and wanted her to put as much distance between us and that thing as possible. And then my sister started crying. She was confused because we were obviously scared and she didn't know why. She was only 4 or 5 and had never seen 2 people at once being super afraid. I kept my eyes on the object until we turned off the road and I couldn't see it anymore. Only then did I turn back to the front to try to calm my sister down. I wrapped my arm around her and I asked her to show me what was on the radio stations that she had been bouncing between. Even as I comforted her, our grandma kept mumbling to herself, like under her breath, saying, "I've never seen anything like that. What was that?" The rest of the ride home was spent with each of us checking the mirrors and looking back over our shoulders. Even though we couldn't see it anymore, we still felt super uneasy and scared. I was personally terrified it would show back up. I didn't know what it was. I thought I might, but Grandma wasn't talking about it right then. We got home and ran inside, sending my dad back to the truck to get the groceries. Even though the truck was in the garage, I didn't want to go back outside. He didn't understand why we were so shaken. We tried to explain that to him, but he brushed us off. I think he first thought we were just messing with him, until the phone rang. My dad's friend who worked at the town office called him and started telling him that there had been numerous reports of sightings of this weird thing hovering in the sky over near where we lived. We lived in a small town where everybody knows everything, so it was no surprise that the news was traveling fast. But still, an unusual sighting shouldn't be an emergency. I could tell from listening that his friend thought it was funny that people were calling in and just wanted to share it with my dad. But when the call ended, my dad turned to us, and the smiling face he had on while talking to his friend had now changed. He had been going along with his friend and hadn't said anything about what we had seen. But now he looked at us, and I could tell he believed us. I was so relieved that other people had seen it. I didn't feel as crazy, but even now, all these years later, I don't talk about that night. We always just kept it within our family that we had also seen it. At least until now that I'm telling you and finally getting it off my chest. But no matter what, that night will be burned into my memory forever. Most especially, I won't forget the way that energy field felt. That was freaky. I wish we could have gotten an answer, any answer, but just knowing that other people saw it too helps. Let me know what you think about these stories in the comments below. And don't forget to check out Donovan Dread, who releases almost every single day. Also, if you like true crime, then check out Donovan Dread True Crime. There are new releases several times a week.